So our work group was the behavioral phenotyping work group. And I just want to start by acknowledging my co-authors, in particular, Doctors Sasha Yakind and Naomi Nasnik, who drafted the manuscript, but also Dr. Yelena Bodine, Flora Hammond, Doug Katz, Jacques Lotte, Molly McNett, Lionel Nakash, Katie O'Brien, Caroline Schnakers, Tarek Sharshar, and Beth Slowmine. So ton of work done by this group. I'm very grateful. So, just a little bit of background on why. So the current gold standard for diagnosing disorders of consciousness is bedside behavioral assessment. I think most people know that. But the field really suffers from a lack of standardization in our approach to assessment. And this lack of standardization increases the risk of diagnostic error, inaccurate prognostication, inappropriate management strategies, and then all of that piled up together can increase caregiver distress. So the purpose of CDEs in general is to harmonize the approach to data collection, which in turn accelerates data sharing, increases study efficiency, and improves data quality. So our focus was on selecting common data elements that reflect the observable behavioral characteristics of the 5 major disorders of consciousness: coma, vegetative state, also known as unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, minimally conscious state minus, minimally conscious state plus, and post-traumatic confusional state. So that was our focus. To select the CDEs, we used a 5-step process. The first step was to review the existing NINDS common data elements for stroke, TBI, and subarachnoid hemorrhage to see which ones we thought were applicable to DOC behavioral phenotyping. Second step was we nominated and then systematically vetted new CDEs that were proposed by the expert panel. Step 3, we took that compiled group of existing and new CDEs and classified them using the existing NINDS classification system for tiering system. And then the fourth step was iterative review of the proposed CDEs, ultimately leading to consensus-based approval. And then the final step, once we had approval on the new set of CDEs for behavioral phenotyping, we developed case report forms to ensure systematic data collection. The 6 tiers or classification levels for the CDEs are: first, the general core CDEs. So these are common data elements that would be required for use across all neurologic diseases, not specific to disorders of consciousness, but all neurologic diseases. Disease core CDEs are required for all disorders of consciousness studies, regardless of what the disease or etiology is. The next tier are basic CDEs. These are also known as highly recommended supplemental. So different CDE groups call them different things. We're hoping to get that completely standardized across CDEs at some point. But the basics are CDEs that are strongly recommended for all DOC studies. Next tier, supplemental CDEs, which are recommended, not required, for specific types of DOC studies. So it really depends on the context of the study, the aims of the study, and in some cases, the design of the study in the supplemental category. The 5th tier are exploratory CDEs. So these are CDEs that can be considered. Typically, they are new. There's not much information about how they perform, how they behave. They may not be fully validated yet, but they're appropriate for consideration. And then there's another category. These are not CDEs, but they're related. These are called key design elements. So key design elements actually are parameters around the common data elements. So they really specify specific methodologic not indications, but methodologic parameters for obtaining the CDEs. So I just want to make one note about the classifications that I just mentioned. So the NINDS is currently in the process of revamping its classification schema. So I think we will see changes. I can say at this moment that the listing that we have now is very likely to change. So it'll be important for people to sort of stay abreast of what NINDS is doing across the CDEs, because it's a moving target to some extent right now. So the behavioral phenotyping work group divided our selection of CDEs into those that are appropriate for use in adults with disorders of consciousness and those appropriate for use in pediatric cases. And the reason we did that is that they're simply not interchangeable. Obviously, adults and children are very different populations from a developmental standpoint. And so if we attempted to apply the same set of CDEs to both of these very different populations, they would very likely behave differently. So we set out to distinguish the two lists. I want to thank in particular Beth Slomine for heading up really overseeing the process for selecting the pediatric CDEs. At the end of the day, for adults, we selected 232 common data elements. Now, when I say, what does that mean? That doesn't mean they're all distinct. So, for example, a single instrument for disorders of consciousness, a single measure, might be comprised of 20 different individual common data elements. So that's how you should interpret that number. So 232 altogether, but that included 132 newly proposed CDEs for DOC. On the pediatric side, we selected 80 common data elements, 41 of which were new. One thing that I would highlight about the behavioral phenotyping CDEs is that we have introduced what are called test completion codes for use with the CDEs. So TCCs offer a systematic means of determining the validity of the CDE acquisition. So you're at the bedside, whether it's a research study or for clinical purposes, and you are administering a DOC outcome measure, assessment scale, for example, you run into some confounding problems along the way. Something happens, or you're aware that there is some underlying issue like sedation, for example, that compromises your assessment. So what the CDEs do is standardize the process of, first of all, indicating, were you able to get that particular piece of the assessment in a valid manner? And then if you were not, what was the reason it was confounded? So you're able to, at the end of the day, say, yes, this was done with standard acquisition, fully valid. Another category is attempted it, but it was invalid because it was disrupted by some confounding factor. Did not attempt it at all because of a known underlying factor. Like, for example, again, there was, a patient had been paralyzed prior to the assessment. And then, again, the point is you're able to indicate for every test, if you will, administered, or every administration of a CDE element, whether it was valid or not, and if not, what the reason was. So that's I think, a step forward in helping us fully utilize the power of the CDEs. For example, it's not missing data, right? So if there was a confounding factor that had to do with sedation, we might actually be able to use that information in our analyses, because it's really not missing. There was another thing going on that compromised consciousness. So those who are interested in using the DOC CDEs can obtain them for free. The way you do that is they are stored on the Zenodo, Zenodo website. I will read out the address. So it's https://zenodo.org/records/721-023-6 capital Z, capital E, capital W, small z, number 1, capital S, dash capital B 2 small g capital Q. The last thing I'd mention for those interested is, the CDE, the utility of the CDEs is really entirely contingent on whether they're going to be used. So we strongly encourage people doing DOC research and clinicians as well to begin using them so we have a better understanding of their utility. And as I mentioned earlier, keep an eye on the NINDS Common Data Element website, and that address is https www.commondataelements, one word, .ninds.nih.gov/ as there are ongoing changes to the CDEs in general that are likely to impact the DOC CDEs as well. So important to keep abreast of that. So thank you very much and for this opportunity. And again, hope you'll take a look at the new proposed DOC behavioral phenotyping CDEs. Thanks.